What a me, and welcome to this Australian-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar for August 2023. My name is Janet Fraser, and I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. I live and work on Gundungurra Nurra. Tonight, I have Anna Kerr, Principal Solicitor with the Feminist Legal Clinic, doing tech with me, and also our other solicitor, Bronwyn Williams. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we bid you welcome and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across this continent, and we honour the women. And now to introduce our excellent panel. Ruth Dineen. Ruth coordinates the Hague Mothers project, a voluntary international campaign hosted by FiLiA Feminist charity. Their aim is to support and safeguard mothers and children who are trying to escape abusive relationships but who find that the judicial system is not on their side. Sue Clark. While running for the Animal Justice Party in the federal election in 2022, Sue was cancelled by trans activists for liking an article on Facebook. Her political party sided with the trans activists, and from there she became more involved in an issue she knew very little about at the time. In May 2023, Sue co-founded the group Woman Up Queensland with Leah Whiston. And we have with us a collective of women, AY-waah, the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances, together getting it done. The Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances, AUS, brings together women's liberation groups from the ACT, Tasmania, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia. Working from a common model, AUS groups advocate for women and girls in all domains that impact the lives and welfare of females, but especially where we face discrimination or are vulnerable by reason of our sex. AUS campaigns against homophobia and against gender-based stereotyping in education, online and in the media, and are keenly committed to supporting and advocating for young people impacted by gender medicine. So I'd like to invite Ruth to take the floor, please. Ruth.
Thank you so much, Janet and Anna and Bronwyn, for the invitation. It's really great to be here. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to talk about the Hague Abduction Convention as an international human rights issue. And I'm going to start with some of the messages, emails and stories that we receive every single day from mothers who are caught up in this human rights abuse. I've had to change names, partly because mothers will face further abuse from their partners if they go public, but also because in many cases, the courts themselves silence mothers in this regard. And there is a warning, a lot of this content is quite distressing. So, Vicky wrote to us last year. She'd fled Ireland and was back home in the US. She sent us screenshots of page after page of violent threats and vicious abuse from her ex-husband. She said, "I suffered over 10 years of narcissistic abuse from him. My children's entire life up to the moment we left was filled with toxicity and abuse from their father. Now my ex has filed a Hague Convention against us. It's very frightening, the thought of my children being shipped back to a country where we have nothing. We have no family, no support. I just know they're going to send my kids back and I'll have to follow. I'm absolutely terrified. What if he kills us?" Sarah was returned to Australia from New Zealand after her abusive ex-partner won his Hague case against her. New Zealand citizens are not able to claim benefits in Australia, as you probably know, and they're not eligible for support. So Sarah's ability to look after her daughter was severely compromised, a fact that jeopardized the custody battle that followed. She told us her story. "The legislation," she said, "forced me and my 2-year-old daughter into homelessness. This law doesn't care about justice. It stripped us of our basic right to have a roof over our heads, favouring the rights of the father, no matter what the consequences for us." Dee was the first Hague mother I ever met. Her story and her endless courage continue to inspire and move me. She wrote, "My first escape was when my first baby was born. She was just out of the hospital, having been beaten out of me by her own father, and was premature and tiny. He lost his temper because she cried. He lost his temper because I tried to push him off me when he raped me just after having a traumatic birth. I held him in my arms by those damned windows, and he punched me while I held this tiny, precious baby, sending the two of us flying over backwards towards the glass and onto my back. She, thankfully, was okay. Not that he cared. I was not. I waited until he went out to work. I packed a backpack with diapers and wipes and other maternal detritus. I put the baby into a sling across my chest, and I took myself out of the country with her. The Hague Convention sent us back. My second escape was soon after I'd been returned from the first, my third a year or so after that. One more precious child followed, then there were three of us trying to escape a man who was bent on destroying us and being helped to do so by patriarchal systems which enabled his abuse. I wrestled with being meaningless as far as any help went. The children perhaps mattered, but I did not. My broken bones, my cuts, my head injuries, my deaf ear, my messed up eye, none of it mattered. I ceased to matter. I was a golem that only existed to protect the children. I have no idea how I made it out of those days with any of me intact. The Hague has defined my entire life and clouded every single day since I first decided that either I ran with the baby or else he was going to continue hitting me, raping me, that he would eventually kill me. I feared he would kill the children too. His blank rages were not something that were controllable or periodic. I lived under a regime of permanent fear. And finally, Cassandra. Cassandra had escaped to Australia from England because she feared being killed by her children's father, a man who had sexually assaulted and abused her. She told police he said he was going to chop me up in little pieces and post me piece by piece to my family. Nevertheless, an Australian judge ordered her children to return to England, and, as a loving mother, she went with them. Soon after her return from Australia, and just hours after begging the police in England to drive her to a safe house, she was stabbed to death by her ex-partner in front of her children and her own mother. In the days before she was murdered, she was, her mother said, unraveling with fear. And what all of these mothers, and there are many thousands more, have in common is that they've fallen foul of the 1980 Hague Abduction Convention. I'm going to play a short video which explains the problem. It's presented by Natalie Anderson, a Hague mother herself who works with us and whose children are currently trapped in Croatia by the Hague. So I'll stop sharing the slides and try to share the video. Hopefully that will work.
The 1980 Hague Convention on International Parental Child Abduction was designed to ensure the swift and safe return of children who are taken across international borders by one parent without the other parent's permission. It's usually very effective, but there's a problem. The convention was originally designed to deal with fathers who abduct children and to protect mothers and children, but that's changed. Now, in over 75% of cases, the abducting parent is the mother. Many of them are fleeing domestic abuse.
There's nothing that actually protects a fleeing mother and child. No local justice, no international justice, nothing.
The convention forces children, and therefore mothers, to return to the country they have fled. Leaving an abuser is terrifying. Fleeing across borders doubly so. Mothers are leaving their homes, their jobs, their friends. They're traumatized and often in fear of their lives. They try to flee to safety, and then the Hague Convention hits them.
Being in court was so terrifying, so stressful that it has left me traumatized. And then they sent my sons back to the man who was beating me, raping me.
Hague mothers are rarely entitled to legal aid. There are not many specialist lawyers available, and they only have a few weeks and sometimes only a few days to prepare their case. The only defence available to them is Article 13b of the Convention. The court does not have to order the return of a child if the mother can prove that there is a grave risk that returning them would expose them to physical or psychological harm or place them in an intolerable situation. But grave risk is interpreted very narrowly. Domestic abuse against the mother is rarely seen as a grave risk or intolerable situation for the child, in spite of extensive evidence to the contrary. Children are almost always returned to the country and often into the care of the abusive parent.
My ex has filed a hate convention case against us after we fled Ireland last year. I just know they're going to send my kids back and then I'll have to follow. But what happens to us when we get there? What if he kills us?
Mothers must choose whether to return with their children or send them back alone. Those who do return face post-separation abuse, destitution, homelessness, isolation, and sometimes even criminal proceedings. They often have no family and no support networks, a textbook context for continued abuse.
It is not in any child's best interest to grow up with a mother who is isolated or unemployed and depressed, trapped in a foreign country by an abusive ex-partner. There has never been a single day when I have felt safe or felt that my children were safe here.
We, Hague Mothers, aim to end this injustice with the help of international support from lawyers, domestic violence professionals, academics, women's groups, human rights activists, child psychologists, the Hague Mothers themselves, and the general public. We call on the Hague Secretariat to recognise the grave risk and intolerable situation caused by exposure to domestic abuse. Where domestic abuse is alleged, we ask for the following amendment to the Convention. Legal aid for mothers. A rebuttable presumption of no return. Welfare hearings held in a safe location. The views and wishes of the child to be fully considered. And a restriction on the use of protective measures to defeat Article 13B. Are the Hague Mothers. We're an unstoppable global movement for justice.
Okay, so as Natalie explained, Hague Mothers was set up to end these injustices. And the injustices I've told you about, the stories I've told you about, are quite dramatic ones. But also it can happen that a mother is given permission, for example, to go back to her own country to look after elderly parents. And then suddenly she's hit with a Hague Convention petition and finds herself considered an abductor, and the father takes custody of the children. So it can be dramatic or it can be everyday. But basically, any mother who is living in a country which is not her home country and who has a child, whether she's married, whether she's separated, whether she's divorced, whether she's ever been married to that father, whether the father's abusive or not, can become a victim of the Hague Convention. So the question is, how will we do it? Because it's a pretty impossible task. And we intend to do it. We intend to end the injustices through the international sisterhood. And Janet and Anna are part of that. And thank them very much for being part of that. So we're working in coordination, co-producing this project with approximately 90 women from across the world. Hague Mothers, lawyers, domestic violence professionals, academics, journalists, psychiatrists, counsellors, feminists, activists, children's rights advocates, and many more. And we're supported, as I mentioned earlier, by the FiLiA charity, which is a feminist charity based in the UK, but it has a global reach. And here are some of the things we're doing. We decided to focus initially on the UK, the US and Canada, and Australia and New Zealand, partly because of the language issue, but partly because those countries have the majority of Hague cases, both between themselves and in general. But as we set up about 18 months ago, and so the rest of the world has started to join us. So we now have people working with us from Brazil, from Mexico, from Japan, from Hawaii, from Europe, etc. It's growing and growing because it's a worldwide problem. Here are some of the things we're trying to do. So we're trying to build an evidence base. At the moment, Hague courts don't collect evidence of what happens during or after the court hearing. So anything we tell them, they just say it's anecdotal. So it's really important we start to build that base. So we're going to collect mother stories, and Janet is part of that enterprise. We're doing case law analysis, and that's happening in the UK at the moment and will happen further afield, we hope, in the future. And we're collecting statistical evidence so that we can present that evidence in every possible regard, both qualitative and quantitative. We're raising awareness. This is absolutely critical, and later on I'm going to ask you to help me with that. Once people know, particularly once women know about the Hague Convention, they tend to get involved, or they tend to be concerned, obviously, because it's such an extraordinary human rights abuse. But we need to let them know. At the moment, it's one of the world's best kept secrets. So we created that video that you've already seen. We're also active on social media. We attend conferences and webinars like this. We write articles. We put pieces in the media. Anything we can do to raise awareness globally of this problem. We're starting to create resources for mothers themselves, for lawyers, and for domestic violence professionals. The Hague Convention is an international treaty, but it's slightly different in its application in different countries. So we have to tailor those resources for each country. And most importantly, we're lobbying and advocating for change. So we're lobbying governments, we're lobbying the Hague Commission itself, and we're working with the UN. In particular, we're working with the fabulous UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem El-Salem. I don't know if you've come across her, but she is absolutely superb and courageous in her advocacy for women and girls. She recently produced a report called Custody, Violence Against Women and Violence Against Children. And it focused particularly on family courts, but it also, for the first time, mentioned The Hague. She said in her recommendations, the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of Child Abduction needs to be revised to better protect abused women and their children by allowing a stronger defence against return if there is family and domestic violence. And it needs to incorporate an understanding that a child's return may compel an abuse survivor to return to violence and harm. Now, for us, that's self-evident, but to have somebody of her stature saying that publicly in a public report is really significant, and we're hoping to use that as leverage for further change, and we're working closely with her on that. We're also, since this is an Australian webinar, I want to tell you about some of the things that are happening in Australia, because you are leading the field internationally in these changes. We inherited an incredibly fertile context in Australia, with many thanks to Hague Mothers, lawyers and activists who've been lobbying the government and raising awareness way before this campaign ever got going. In particular, Her Hague Story, Anna was involved as well, and Gina Masterton has been doing sterling work in this regard. So it was a really fertile context. And when we arrived on the scene, you already had a new Australian Attorney General who had committed to safeguarding and supporting mothers in these circumstances. And he started to make steps to do that. So It's produced new regulations which will allow domestic violence to be taken into account, even if it's only alleged rather than proven. He's also set up a legal aid option, so that's now available to taking parents, which it wasn't in the past, as well as to the parents who are petitioning for return. And there's been a committee, which many of you will know about, looking into the status of objections by children and children, both in family courts and in Hague courts. So we're pushing for more. Instead of domestic violence being allowed to be considered if it's alleged, we want courts to have to consider it. We want it to be a must, not a may. And if domestic violence is proven, then we want everything off the table. There should not be the possibility of bringing a Hague Convention petition if domestic violence is evidenced. Also, the legal aid provision is fantastic, but if the lawyer doesn't understand about, for example, coercive control or the impact of domestic abuse on the child, even if the child is not a witness to it, but just hears about it, then that lawyer is worse than useless. So we're really going to push over the next year or so to make that legal aid provision domestic violence and trauma informed. And also we're pushing for the child's wishes to be fully considered. There is an option within the Hague Convention for child's objections to be heard and actually acted on, but it's very seldom used. And in Australia, the regulations make it particularly hard. It has to be a very strong objection from the child. We put in petitions, we put in submissions to the Family Law Amendment Bill Committee, who were looking at it. And we weren't the only ones to put in submissions in this regard. And they appear to have borne fruit. I heard the day before yesterday that we are able to anticipate that the existing regulations will be repealed and the children's voice will be given a much more, will be brought to centre stage, which would be fantastic. We're also co-producing resources for mothers. It's taking us a bit of time because this entire project is voluntary and there is no funding source, no direct funding source. So it takes time to do things. But once we do them, they're really done well because we have so much expertise at our command. Our huge priority at the moment is to influence the outcome of the 8th special session of the Hague Conference, which meets in October. They only meet once every 6 years, so this is a really key moment for us, and all our energies are focused on that. So we're doing a number of things. We've written an open letter to the Hague Special Commission, and we're getting it signed by experts in the Hague, people who we think could influence the Hague Special Commission. So the real premier names in the whole Hague world are signing it. So we have over 50 signatures to date, and we expect to have about 70 by the time we send that letter in. We're also producing, on the other end of the scale, we're producing a booklet of mothers' voices with some of the stories, like the stories you just heard this morning, and voices of other mothers across the world. And we're going to send that to the Hague Special Commission as well, so that they absolutely see, they can't say they don't know what happens when they make these judgments, what the actual outcomes are for mothers and for their children. And there's a lot more we're doing, and that's where I really need your help. I'll put some links in chat at the end of this, and I'd really, really appreciate it if every one of you could help us to make these things happen. So first of all, there's a petition called Protect Hague Victims, an international petition which will be sent to the Hague Commissioners. So far, it's had about 34,000 signatures globally, and it would be great if we got that to 40,000 or even 50,000 before it's sent in October to the commissioners. There's a link there. I'll also put it up in chat afterwards, as I say. The petition was started by an organisation called Global Arc, who work with mothers, and it's supported by a number of other survivor organisations and by ourselves right across the world. So please, at the end of this, if you could check the link, if you copy the link, if you could sign the petition for us, but then, even more important, if one person signs it, that's great. If you can then send it to, say, 10 family, friends, professionals, colleagues, anybody you know who think might care about this appalling human rights injustice, if you could each get 10 people to sign it and ask them to pass it on, that would make a real difference. And what else would we like you to do? Please share the Time for Change video. That's our key way of getting the information out about the Hague Convention and about our campaign to change it. So share it with anybody you know. Share it with mothers in particular, and certainly mothers who are in abusive relationships or mothers who might need to flee across international borders, with lawyers, with DV professionals, with family, with friends. The more people who know about it, the more our voices will become strong. And in particular, please lobby your MPs to push for change. Every country who signed up to the Hague Convention, there are about 102 countries worldwide, sends 2 representatives to that Hague Commission meeting in October. If we can petition our MPs to put pressure on those representatives, who are generally civil servants, so that everybody going to The Hague is at least aware that there are serious and significant human rights problems here, then that will be a big difference for us. Normally, the Hague Commission meets and is very unwilling to consider the real problems that are happening with The Hague. We need to change that. Please follow us on Twitter. We're almost at 700 followers. If you all sign up, we'll be at a great deal more. And rather than just following us, if you could retweet, if you could send us information that you thought would be useful for us to retweet, that would be great. Anything to get the word out there. And if you'd like to know more about the project itself, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, and there's the link there. Again, I'll put it in chat. And finally, some of you may have expertise or experience that you think could help us. If you do, and if you have some time to spare, and I know absolutely that women who would come to these sorts of things are activists and are always very busy, but if you have any time to spare that you think could help us, please email me and join us. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Janet and Anne and Bronwyn, for inviting me. And I'll stop share and put that information in chat.
Thank you, Ruth. The material is always so grueling, but your warmth always shines through. It's beautiful. So, yes, being involved is hard work but meaningful. So anyone who would like to join in, please do. We'd love to see you. Thank you, Ruth. So I would now like to hand over to Sue Clark, who is here for Woman Up Queensland, which is such an awesome name. Sue, over to you.
Okay, so what I'm talking about tonight is about grassroots action, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in Queensland. We're a newly formed group. Leah Whiston and I formed this group in May, and what prompted us to do that is, I guess many people in Queensland at least would know about the stickering of Shannon Fentiman's sign, the Attorney General, in May. I won't name the person that I was with who actually did the stickering, but a week after we did that, Shannon Fentiman came out and actually gave us gold, the way she responded to a sticker, which was the dictionary definition of woman, an adult human female. She stated that it was basically hate speech and that we did a lot of damage to many people in that community. So the following week, what we did, there were 5 of us that got together, and we had a big banner which said woman, adult, human, female. It was like a double bed sheet, really quite large, and then smaller call flutes which just had the dictionary definition on that. And we went into an area outside of Shannon Fentiman's office, who's also the Minister for Women. She's no longer Attorney General, she's Minister for Health. And we thought that the public may not know a lot about this issue, and we were quite surprised by the positive response we got, and it was very empowering. And so after that, because even Jordan Peterson tweeted about this, and he's got 4 million followers, so it really did make Shannon Fentiman look quite stupid, really, to react like that and to make such a big deal out of it. So Leah and I got together and we formed Woman Up. And it's just about actions. That's what we do. But Leah in June made this incredible phone call to a plastic surgery in Brisbane because she saw on Reddit a 15-year-old talking about how she had a double mastectomy. So Leah rang up, and she was told that they would do double mastectomies on girls as young as 13. And so Leah wanted evidence. So she rang back and she spoke to a different person and she put it on record. And they did actually confirm to Leah that they will do double mastectomies or top surgery on 13-year-old girls. While we don't have any evidence that they have done that on 13-year-olds, we definitely know that they're doing it on 15-year-olds. So what we did is, first of all, the Daily Mail reported on it, and that was excellent, that article. And even there was a call by leading surgeons calling for a national medical regulator to set clear and specific guidelines. And Mark Ashton, he's the counsellor of Australasia College of Surgeons at the Melbourne University. So that was a positive outcome to that. So then we went outside the surgery and we did an action, and there was a banner and it just said, the name of this surgery will do double mastectomies on minors. And it's a very, very woke area of Brisbane, and we weren't sure what we would get from that. But it was about 75% positive. So we're very happy with that. And then we went back about 3 weeks later and did it again, and the positive response was even greater than that. So it just goes to show you get out there and the public is not supporting gender ideology. So we just want to empower women to get out there and do these sorts of actions. It can be a very successful action with even two people. If you have a big banner, it's very, very effective. It doesn't have to be a professionally done. It's just a sheet with the words on it. So then for the Women's Rights Network in July, we stood outside of the FIFA Women's World Cup and we were giving out leaflets, fantastic leaflets from the Women's Rights Network. And it was, again, very, very positive, but the FIFA security weren't happy with us being there. And they tried to tell us on the first night that FIFA controlled the streets of Brisbane in a 2-kilometre radius and told us that we weren't welcome, which was, of course, not true. They did have some control around the venue, but not what they were considering. They felt very threatened that we were there. And the leaflet just was saying the biological advantages of men over women in women's sports. So then, we do a speaker's corner in Brisbane each month, and we're hoping that will grow. So that's another action. We record that and we put it up on YouTube as well. And we did another action recently outside Shannon Fentiman's office. Again, very, very positive. And just on Friday, I'm sure that you've heard about Gillian Spencer from the Queensland Children's Hospital, or I guess people in Australia would have heard. And she's currently got 71 doctors that have signed a letter to Shannon Fentiman asking for an inquiry into the gender-affirming care model in Brisbane, in Queensland, and Shannon Fentiman's refusing to meet. So what we did on Friday is we stood near the Children's Hospital and we again had these two massive banners, and we had quite a few people there then. I think it was about maybe 8. And once again, we caused a bit of a stir. The hospital staff were coming out. There were doctors, nurses, staff that were there trying to intimidate us, with taking photos of us. But the interesting thing was, you could tell they were doctors. They had their stethoscope around their shoulders. And, of course, whether or not they felt really good about the action we were doing, they couldn't come up and say, oh, you're doing a great job because of the way Gillian's been suspended. And that was sort of, a dog whistle to other people within the Children's Hospital. Don't speak out against gender ideology. So, so we've been doing all those actions, and that's just from May. And we did our first street action, except for Speaker's Corner, in July, and we're still in August. And we just want to encourage women to get out there, even if there's 2 or 3 of you, just stand on a street. They're doing it in Melbourne as well. We did, with IWD, organise an action, and we supported that action. And it was at the National Labour Conference in Brisbane last weekend. God, I think, it was last weekend. The time just goes so quickly. And what happened there was, unfortunately, the Greens were there and they were in opposition about the cost of, the rising cost of rent. So they were there protesting, saying they wanted rents frozen. We didn't anticipate that we would get such aggression from the Greens. So we don't go into an area generally where we think there's going to be any sort of risk. But they encircled us, and the police eventually had to break the circle and take us out safely. So, even the Greens Party is quite dangerous. So, and also, if you do actions, because there are these activists, there's a well-known antagonist in Brisbane, and they will try and hack you. So we do all our organising on Signal. So if you're going to do an action, I highly recommend that you do it on Signal where it's encrypted. And because there was this well-known antagonist, he did actually infiltrate, and they'll go to great lengths to infiltrate. So you really do need to make sure that you're safe. When you're doing the sort of pop-up street action, we do it for just about an hour. So we've never been at any risk at all. So we'd love to see in Queensland all the different regions of just women coming out and just doing these roadside actions, because it then says to you, because when you're sort of in this bubble on social media, you don't really understand what the public's reaction is to it, because all you're ever told is that the majority of the public support it. That's not what we've found. We've found well over 90% of people don't support it. And Angie Jones and a couple of women in Melbourne do street actions as well. And Angie said it's overwhelming down there as well. It's about 98%. So, and after we did the National Labour Conference, we all went onto the major overpass in the city and we did banner drops for Save Women's Sports. And we got massive support there as well. So we just really want to encourage people, you know, and it can be done cheaply. You just get, maybe if you've got old sheets or old call flutes, which you can paint over, that sort of thing. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And it is just so empowering, and the public love it. You know, we get cheers, we get people beating their horns, we get people clapping, singing out in support. It's just incredible. And then you realise that we can defeat this ideology. We just need to get out there, and once people see us out there, that will make them feel a bit more brave about going out. So really that's just what I wanted to talk about is, so we started the group in May and really did our first action on the 1st of July. And we've done quite a number now, and we're going to get out there hopefully every week or every 2 weeks. So I just want to encourage women to do that, and also men, because we've got support from men as well. That on Friday when we did the one at the Children's Hospital, we had a man there that came and supported. So that, you know, there's a lot of men that are just as opposed to this ideology as well. And if you can get people together, I can tell you, you'll make a big, big difference, and you'll come away from those actions and feel really good, because you know that what the politicians are telling us, what the trans lobby are telling us, it's not what the public are thinking. So that I just wanted to share that with you tonight. So thank you, Janet, and everyone for having me on tonight. So yeah, it's great. I hope you all sort of take advantage and do that.
Thanks,
Janet.
Sue. So inspiring. It's so great to hear about all the new groups popping up, which of course is the great segue into our AY-waah thing. But that's terrific. I'm really excited to hear that you're so prolific with your public actions. That's awesome. Thank you so much. So now we're going to hear from the AY-waah group, and I'm going to hand over to Karen Smith, who is going to run this segment. Karen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Janet. My name's Karen Smith, and thank you so much to WDI Australia New Zealand for having us on tonight. We are the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. I'll tell you a bit more about who's involved directly. I'm going to first of all give a little bit of background to the AY-waah story, what we cover, our organisation status, some of the benefits that we see of affiliation between the groups. I'll also touch upon handling consensus and some of the actions that we do. Then we'll have some of our sisters from our various groups, our affiliate groups, come in and talk about some of the main issues confronting their states as in terms of gender ideology and other things that we're also involved with, such as fighting prostitution and sex trafficking. And then I'll just come back and finish up with some of the submissions and letters that we've been putting together. In the first instance, however, I'll just show you, share our screen, and there's our details if you want to jot them down if you're at all interested. As Janet said in the introduction, we are the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. We're women's liberation groups committed to the protection and advancement of women and girls. We're working on the understanding, of course, that sex is a biological fact with material consequences for females. We cover a whole bunch of things, gender identity, genderism, gender identity ideology, pornography, prostitution, sex trafficking, reproductive exploitation, control over reproductive sovereignty and rights. We came about in 2017, we started to organise. We really kind of kicked off with our first group, the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, in 2018. And at that time, we weren't out particularly about gender identity. We kept that kind of in the box and just dealt with a whole bunch of other things. We met monthly, started to build our group. Then the pandemic hit, we lost our meeting venue. Towards the end of 2020, however, we did start to get a few more queries about from women asking if we were gender critical. So that's the point at which we thought, yes, we had better refocus and make it explicit that we are gender critical. So we did that, and that's the Canberra group, Women's Action Alliance Canberra. So we got together, started to build the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, and then towards the end of last year, we started to get some interest from sisters in Tasmania. So we decided to trial a bit of an affiliation, and we started with Women's Action Alliance Tasmania. And the women down there have been doing fantastic work in terms of all of this business. So after that, and earlier this year, we then started to get some interest from Queensland. So we started up a Queensland Women's Action Alliance. And once we had the three groups together, we thought now we've probably got enough to get together a proper model and some guidelines for women in other areas, other states, cities, regions who might want to follow the model and get on board. So that's when we came up with AY-waah, the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. And in that, we still cover everything: gender identity, ideology, prostitution, sex trafficking, pornography, reproductive exploitation. But part of our model is that each of our groups really want to be seen as serious, sensible organisations with good standing in the community, organisations that use fact and evidence, reason, rationality, courtesy, compassion, all these good things. They're the things that we use to make our case. And what we do is we target or engage those who've got legislative authority, maybe some political accountability, social responsibility for the safeguarding, the protection, the advancement of women and girls. They're the people who we target strategically. We're not aligned with the left or the right or with any particular religious perspective or a particular belief system. All of the women in our groups, we recognise, respect their autonomy, their boundaries, their comfort levels. So all of the women in our groups, they choose for themselves what they want to be involved with, how, to what degree. We do not work in competition with other non-AY-waah groups, and instead we really like others to come to us, and we approach them also with opportunities to work collaboratively, especially if there are matters of joint significance. So that's a really important part of our model as well. Where in terms of our organisation status, we're not incorporated, we're not not-for-profits, we're not associations, we don't have charity status. And we've chosen that because it allows for us to be flexible. It gives us anonymity, means we don't have to have formal organisational structures. We don't need to have fees or insurance. We don't have to have constitutions. There's no tax implications, no financial reporting obligations. So a lot of that admin is cut through. And it doesn't limit our political and our campaigning activities because, that's the case for charities. The benefits of some of this kind of affiliation are that we've got very horizontal structure. There's no one group in charge. We're on the same page as regards our model and our ethos. Our groups can focus then locally and have independence on what's important to them, and some of our sisters will talk about what's happening and the main issues confronting them directly. But what it also allows us to do is it allows us to come together as a national group. So that means we can co-sign things under one national banner, gives more weight to national submissions, sharing, coordination of resources and things of that nature. So when groups become affiliated, they all agree on some of the main points and the general approach in our manifesto and our guidelines, general agreement on what to target and not to target. And we also have guidelines on how to gain consensus within groups and between the groups. And we've got representative level structures. That's about our only structure in place, and we've got some of the other representatives from other AUS affiliate groups here tonight. We've got also guidelines for recruitment and vetting, and of course vetting is important when we're dealing with people who might be coming to us with not such good intentions. So we've got guidelines for that. We've got guidelines for how the tone and manner that we have in our submissions. We've got social media guidelines. So we've kind of put together a whole package so that women, when they come to us, they know exactly what they're signing up for. A part of the model is that, well, we've got two main parts. We do submissions, letter writing, all the boring, unsexy stuff, if you like. But then we've got the interesting stuff like actions, which, again, we've got guidelines for those. They need to be legal, safe, properly planned, risk managed, strategic, highly visible, and things like that. So that's kind of how we operate. Each does its own thing in terms of internal communication and how it's set up. Some use Signal, some use WhatsApp, some use Messenger. Again, that's just an overview from us in Canberra and for the whole sisterhood that we're trying to build here. I'm going to come off share now, and we will hear from Emma, who's our representative from the Queensland Women's Action Alliance. She's going to talk for a couple of minutes on just some of the major issues confronting Queensland at the moment.
Thank you, Karen. Queensland Women's Action Alliance spans a very large distance from Brisbane to Townsville, and we've already heard from Sue about the amazing work done by Women Up in Brizzy, and I'm so proud of them. I suppose the most pressing concern in Queensland at the moment is the Births, Deaths and Marriages Registration Bill that was passed in June and will probably come into effect beginning of next year. It allows people from 16 and over, 16 onwards, to be able to change their sex on their birth certificate with just a statutory declaration and a statement. The second thing that is a concern to us is the Criminal Code amendment, which is the Serious Vilification and Hate Crimes bill being amended. Under that legislation, any public display or distribution or publication of prohibited symbols which can cause a member of the public to feel menaced, harassed and offended, I had to read that, that was a mouthful, will come into effect. It has, I don't think it's been passed yet, but it is in the process of going through. And this raises a number of concerns, not because we plan on doing anything hateful, but because they, as Sue mentioned, they do see women's groups. And in fact, in some of the Greens literature, they do say that they're concerned about feminist groups in Queensland. So they're viewing women and the definition of woman as being hate speech. So we're a bit concerned about the future for actions in Queensland and really trying to get a wriggle on to do as many as we can. So at present, we're doing actions in Brisbane and in Townsville, and we would really like to spread that to other regional centres because we are very spread out. So if anyone's watching and they want to join, let me know.
Thanks so much there, Emma. And yes, you can get in touch with us via that email address that I sent out earlier, and we'll put you in touch with QA. I'm going to sling now to Sue from AY-waah, which is the Women's Action Alliance, Western Australian Women's Action Alliance. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Karen. AY-waah is a newly established chapter which started in May this year, and it's finding its feet with 5 members in Perth and the surrounding suburbs. We haven't quite got everything together, and we feel that's okay. We're grateful members of the mothership, which is basically you, Karen, working up to being more active members of the supportive whole alliance. In response to what's happening currently, we do find that we're working towards a few things here in WA. And here is where I confess that the woman who is arguably the brains of our outfit in WA, but who can't be here tonight, is largely responsible for what I have in front of me, my cheat sheet. And so I'll carry on with it. Something relates to the WA Equal Opportunity Act, The Law Reform Commission undertook a broad review of the Equal Opportunity Act and proposed changes following that community consultation. The Equal Opportunity Act review report was tabled in August 22. Changes announced by the majority Labour government included some much-needed amendments, like the removal of the disadvantage test required for sexual harassment complaints and extension of protection to female DV victims. But others are less welcome, including particularly a form of self-ID and the reframing of sexual orientation and related protections to be based on gender rather than sex. Since WA only brought in protection on the basis of sexuality 20 years ago, this is not welcome news, and we know this will most disadvantage lesbians who are at the pointy end of the sex and gender wars. Number 2, another item we're watching out for opportunities to act on is the coming potential decriminalisation of sex work. We expect that this may be coming soon following changes in other states, and we're very worried about the effects of this, given what has happened in other countries and Australian states. We know that what is usually put forward as protecting women in the sex trade and promoting their empowerment actually results usually in less choice and worse exploitation. Number 3, WA's abortion laws, already the worst in the country, are being renewed with a proposal to remove abortion as an offence under the Criminal Code, that is, criminalising abortion. Other changes proposed are the removal of mandatory counselling, changes to how later term abortions are managed, as well as changing the gestational limit from the current 20 weeks to 23 weeks. And last, WA is developing its first sexual violence prevention and response strategy in response to the ongoing and widespread problem of sexual violence. Submissions are due by mid-September, and AY-waah, that's us, plans to submit to ensure that the focus on male violence against women and girls, particularly within the marginalised communities of women and girls, remains central to this strategy. Finally, on behalf of our WA group, I'm going to take this opportunity to express our gratitude publicly for the generous opportunity that Karen, aka AY-waah, has provided to us here in the West. We've been offered the chance to contribute to an amazing professional national alliance of women that is dedicated to the safeguarding, protection and advancement of women and girls. We're very isolated, sometimes we're isolated over in WA, and it's fantastic to be offered this opportunity to join a national alliance. The alliance we can see, whose mission, spirit, principles and guidelines focus on respect in the use of facts and evidence, an alliance that allows our WA group to be independent while also offering us every support. Thank you, Karen. That's me.
Good on you. Thanks so much, Sue, from West Australian Women's Action Alliance, and the Mothership is very happy to have you on board. I'm going to swing now to Lauren from the Women's Action Alliance Tasmania. Lauren, over to you.
Thanks, Karen. So Women's Action Alliance Tasmania started at the beginning of this year. We're geographically dispersed across the state, so we've been focused on actions like submissions, freedom of information requests. We've been involved in some guidance on sex and gender in schools, writing blogs, letters to the editor, those sorts of things. So not so much physical actions, because that's a bit difficult, like our sisters in some of the other chapters. And we were active already before the Let Women Speak event in March, which was fairly awful. I'm sure many of you have seen the footage from Hobart. I was there, but the upside of that was that it activated a bit of a community in Tasmania that WA engages with, focused on women's rights. And that includes our sisters in Women Speak Tasmania, who we've been working collaboratively with, as Karen said earlier. But still, the situation in Tasmania is not good. So we've had both Claire Chandler and Louise Elliott taken to our state anti-discrimination commissioner for fairly, benign views on sex and gender. And we've also had Jessica Hoyle's case where, lesbians can't meet with a single-sex event because there's no protection for sex in our state anti-discrimination legislation. We also have a very hostile political situation at the state level. So politicians like Cassie O'Connor and Rosalie Woodruff from the Greens, who I was standing a few metres away from at the Let Women Speak event, but on the other side. And also I saw Rebecca White, the state Labor leader, and Ella Haddad, a Labor MP, who were standing not too far away as well. And we also don't have any real friends in the Liberals, so not too many allies at the state government level. And we do know that we have upcoming conversion practices legislation at the state level, so that will be a focus for us going forward. And we are always keen to have more women involved in Tasmania, so just reach out to us. Thanks.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Lauren. And yes, you can reach out to any of these groups through the email address that I'll pop up on the screen very shortly. We're going to finish up with Katie, who is recruiting for AUS, a Women's Action Alliance Victoria, and then we'll come back to me just for some final words. So, Katie, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Karen. So, hi, I'm Katie, co-founder and previous member of WAC 2.0. So, we're currently establishing a Women's Action Alliance in Victoria, which we are now recruiting for. So if you're interested in joining us, contact us through the link, which I'll post right now. So the link is in the chat if you'd like to get in contact with us and wanted to join. So right now, we're in the process of doing an environmental scan of the social and political landscape for women and girls in Victoria, with a focus on the harms of gender identity ideology / queer theory, prostitution, pornography, among other significant issues which affect women and girls in Victoria. So, and we'll also be involved in actions which will include submissions, banner drops, working groups, and other actions members might want to be a part of. So again, if you're interested, the link for the Women's Action Alliance group for Victoria is in the chat, which I can paste again, those that might have lost it. And yep, that's WAV.
Terrific. Thank you so much there, Katie. Yes, if you're interested in WAV, please get in touch. They're doing a recruitment round there. So thank you very much. These are just some final things to finish up on with what AY-waah has been up to. Various submissions and letters. Again, we target people in authority with duty of care for women and children. That's our main strategic focus. You can see here we've put in some submissions. One to the Australian Human Rights Framework Joint Parliamentary Committee there. We've also recently put in a submission on the proposed misinformation and disinformation New Powers for ACMA bill. That went in just recently last week. We've also put in a submission on the census topic consultation. We write letters as well. We've got one here to Senator Wong about what's going on in the UN or not going on in the UN for women and girls. So that's the kind of thing that we get involved with. We've also got, beg your pardon, that's our website there. You can read all of our submissions and letters from our website. Our motto is together getting it done. We are hoping to hold a national conference next year, 4th to 5th of October, so please pop that date in your diaries. Information will come out through various channels. That's our email address and our web address. So please do get in touch. Thank you so much again to WDI Australia New Zealand for allowing us to come along today. We are AY-waah, the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances, and together we're getting it done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. It's so great to see women springing forth all over the country. It is indeed a fecund movement, if I can say that. So now I'm going to hand over to myself, except actually this is a movie by Eileen Haley, whom I'm sure many of us know. Eileen has been working on the ABS census stuff that's coming up. And so the next round of submissions are due on the 8th of September. So Eileen couldn't be here tonight, sadly. So you're stuck with me reading her script. and I'm going to share my screen and go through these slides and help us all understand about the census stuff. Okay, so the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS, has public consultation open at the moment on topics to be included in the 2026 census. The deadline for submissions is Friday, the 8th of September. That is a little under 2 weeks' time. Eileen wants to urge everybody to make a submission. Why? First of all, data collection is one of the areas specifically identified in the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights as under threat from gender identity ideology. The Declaration points out, taking violence against women and girls as an example, that the conflation of sex with gender identity leads to the collection of data which is inaccurate and misleading, thereby creating a significant impediment to the development of effective laws, policies, strategies, and actions aimed at the elimination of women's disadvantage and oppression. Secondly, the ABS is being captured by gender identity ideology, and there are 4 aspects Eileen wants to highlight. 1, the ABS is still intending to retain sex as a topic, thank goodness, but they've shortlisted gender as a new topic to be also included in the 2026 census. It looks as though they'll be including male and female in the pick list options, thereby facilitating and perpetuating exactly the kind of conflation the Declaration denounces. And anyway, says Eileen, gender is nothing but old, outdated sex role stereotypes, and gender identity ideology, in Eileen's word, is a load of bollocks. Number 2, the ABS intends to redesign its questions about parentage to have more inclusive language, which may be code for erasing the term mother. 3, the ABS intends to let what it calls the LGBTIQ+ community play a major role in the 2026 census. That's code for trans lobby takeover. They'll be establishing what they call an LGBTIQ+ expert advisory committee for guidance and input, not just on the framing of census topics, but also on the development of what they call educational, promotional, and support materials, which looks like code for a campaign of mass indoctrination in gender identity ideology. 4th, there is no recognition of women as stakeholders in the topics of sex, gender, and parentage. The only stakeholder they're prepared to see is the trans lobby. So that's the why. Now here is the how. Remember, Friday the 8th of September is the deadline. First, go to, and you can all see the link there, and I will put it in the chat. Scroll right down the bottom of the page and click Online Survey. You don't have to have made a submission in phase 1 of the consultation in order to make a submission in phase 2. Click on Potential Removal, Number of Children Ever Born, and use the space to tell the ABS not to erase the term mother when they redesign the questions on this topic, and to regard women as stakeholders on this topic, not just the TQ. The redesign of the questions isn't what the ABS is asking about here, but tell them anyway. They did announce the redesign in their webinar, so it's pertinent. Click on Additional Feedback, end of the list, to get to gender. Under New Topics, tick Gender and use the space to let them know your concerns. Conflation with sex, no consultation with women, regressive sexist ideology, putting ideas in kids' heads, etc. You can attach a file as well as, or instead of, using the spaces in the online form. And finally, here are some useful links. A video produced by the ABS of a webinar on the 3rd of August, informative, especially the Q&A at the end. The announcement about the LGBTIQ+ Community Advisory Committee on the 14th of August, and a short article from the Women's Action Alliance, Canberra. So this is Eileen's presentation. Thank you very much, Eileen, and I will put all of those links in the chat so that we can click on them. Thank you very much, Eileen. That was wonderful. She gives a great presentation, does Eileen. So I would like to thank everybody for coming along. Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing speakers tonight, all of you. The wealth of speakers. It was the biggest ever WDI, and it was really fantastic. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I hope that you have your questions ready, and we will start promoting you to panelists if you would like to have a say.